Talk Live.
It is the Free Talk Cast, brought to you by the same people who do the Free Talk Live radio show. And this is a project that I started on June the 1st because radio is not something that's really popular these days. I actually don't know anyone who listens to any radio stations. And I did when I was in prison, but that was because I didn't have any other options. And it was only like the first week that I was there. Then I bought an MP3 player and I could listen to whatever I want. But on-demand content is far more popular these days than, I forget what they call it, programmed content, which is where some executive somewhere gets to decide what you're going to listen to or what you're going to watch. With Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, Podbean, and all of these other places, you get to decide what you want to watch and when you want to watch it. So it's no surprise to me that streaming audio and streaming video is so much more popular than the program stuff. So that's why we started the Free Talk Cast. Obviously, you can find it at freetalkcast.com. I prefer that you subscribe there just so that we have a better idea of who exactly is listening specifically to the podcast. Anyway, I'm joined this week by
Nikki.
And you haven't been on the show in a while.
No, this is my debut.
It is. Thank you. Thank you for coming out here to do it. It actually worked out pretty well because it turns out that I now live like 20 minutes away from you.
We're neighbors.
Yeah, we are. And I ended up in Winchester, New Hampshire, which was a surprise to me, but that's actually worked out really well, too. Obviously, I just got out of prison in May. And before that, a month before that or so, you had a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And what was that why you sort of stopped going out to Keene to do the show?
Yeah. So I stopped doing the show maybe a couple weeks before my due date.
Sure.
And then I, had the baby. And then, of course, there's like a little recovery period. And I wasn't sure. I was planning on coming back to do the show maybe in June, maybe after Porkfest. I just didn't really know what that was going to look like for us.
Right.
Because obviously I don't have any other kids. So this is all new terrain for me. And it just turns out, with an exclusively breastfed baby who doesn't really love taking the bottle, it's a little bit more complicated for me to be away for 3 hours. Well, and then including, my commute there.
Right.
To and from. So a little bit more than 3 hours, looking more like 4 or 5 hours. And then 7 to 10, that's prime bedtime.
It is.
So so it's just, it's been a little bit complicated. But I'm hoping I will be able to get back onto the radio show once things settle down a little bit and we get more into a flow. But
fantastic. Well, this is easier, it would seem.
Absolutely.
So thank you for being willing to do it. Of course, we talked about it a lot when I was in prison. I was like, I would love for you to help me with this. And of course, you were definitely down for that. And I want to say thank you to that now that I have you here on the air with me.
Absolutely.
You and Matt were some of my main visitors. I got a lot of visitors from coworkers and stuff, but within the Liberty community, not nearly as many.
Yeah.
And like you were the first libertarian to come and visit me. And you were definitely the most consistent. You visited me just about every single week, right up until the day before you had your baby.
Yes. Literally the day before I had my baby, I was visiting Ayer.
Yep.
And so that day was technically my due date. And one of your other visitors asked me when my due date was because I was obviously very visibly pregnant. And I was like, oh, that's funny. It's actually today.
That's so wild.
And then I had her the next day. So, yeah.
During or right around the solar eclipse.
Yeah,
right?
it was a couple of hours before the eclipse. So the day of the eclipse, a couple of hours before. Oh yeah, it was. And the other funny thing is I was joking that I was going to have her on the eclipse.
Really?
But I really didn't think I was going to. I almost bought or rented an Airbnb up in the North Country because that was going to be in the zone of totality, I think they call it.
Yeah.
And then I, thought better of it because I'm like, that is right around my due date. And, I might already have a baby and now, hindsight, I'm really glad I didn't do that because I would have been in labor, either all the way up in the North Country or,
I was
lost out on
fortunate
that.
in 2015 or 2016, wherever it was, to have been in Mississippi in the South when that particular solar eclipse came through. And that was really big news because where I happened to live at was in the path of totality about like 99%.
Oh, cool.
I did not travel to where it was 100%. I had heard everyone saying, oh, there's such a huge difference. I was
Yeah,
like, I
I've
don't
heard
really
that
care that
too.
much because the traffic in Nashville, Tennessee was going to be, it's miserable anyway. But when everyone's going to Nashville
Yeah.
to see the solar eclipse, no thank you, I'm good on that. And I happened to be in prison during this one. And if you want to know how big a dicks the BOP officials are, the eclipse started at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It lasted until about 4:30. And I think it peaked at 3:47, sometime around there. At 3 o'clock, they made us come inside. And we weren't allowed back outside until 4:30. And now, obviously, at 4 o'clock, we have a stand-up count. So we were going to have to be in there for that anyway. But there were various speculative guesses about why this has happened. The main one was that it was going to get very dark. And when it's dark, you're not allowed to be outside. And
Yeah.
at the camp, you're allowed to be outside pretty much whenever, including sometimes when it is actually pretty dark out there. I think it was just because they're dicks.
Yeah.
And they're like, you guys
Just because they can, you know.
yeah, you guys want to get out there and see the eclipse. Well, guess what? You can't. We were able to look at it through windows, but it was only like 91% coverage anyway, so
Yeah.
it wasn't that much. It did not get very dark, and I guess it was neat, but a lot of people had never seen one before at all. So that's how big of dicks the federal government is, and they didn't have to do that. They could have allowed us to go outside. They certainly were not going to provide anyone with eclipse glasses or anything like that.
Yeah.
But then, of course, I got out of prison, and that was on May the 9th because I was sent to a halfway house for 2 weeks, obviously. Then I got released, and I was able to go to Fork Fest. It initially looked like I was going to be allowed to go, but I was going to have to commute each day, which, for those who don't know,
Oh
that's
my
like
gosh,
a 3-hour drive. So every day I would have to drive 3 hours and then drive back 3 hours. And I was going to do it because, I work there. It's kind of important that I be there. But thankfully, my probation officer is really cool. Without any further prompting from me, she talked with her supervisor about it, and he was like, yeah, I don't really care. Aria goes to this thing every year. It's work-related. She's gotten permission to do it before, so I don't have any issue with it.
And I don't see why you wouldn't be able to because it's not even out of the state.
It is not out of the state, and the reason I was told I was not allowed any overnight stays anywhere for the first 60 days of my probation. But what was perplexing about that was that I was living out of a hotel at the time, and I did not have a stable address. So I was very confused. What is the difference whether
Yeah.
I'm in this hotel in Keene or this hotel in Lancaster?
Yeah. So I think in those cases, they consider whatever, like the hotel to be your
Yeah.
residence. But you're right, if somebody was homeless.
Right.
And what is the difference between a hotel in Keene or the Rogers Campground Motel?
Yeah.
Really, what is the big difference?
To me, there isn't one. So luckily, I was able to do that, and I was able to stay at the hotel, and that was great. And I love Pork Fest. It was weird being there because the last time I was there was I went to federal prison 2 days after the end
Yeah.
of Pork Fest last year, and
I forgot it was that soon after.
it was right
That's
after.
wild.
Yep.
I remember we were doing the show last year at Porkfest, and you had just gotten the news that you'd
yeah.
be going, like what facility you'd be going to. So a men's facility, and then like specifically which one you were going to. And it was just, that was just a really crazy moment. I couldn't imagine like how you were feeling.
I was not in a good place. I feel like I held it together fairly well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I had a countdown timer there on the table that counted down exactly how many seconds I had.
And that's also so intense.
It is. Before I had to be in federal prison because I had until 2 o'clock on June the 27th. And I don't really think it made things any worse. But if anyone wants to know what sort of mental state I was in, not only did I have the idea to get this countdown timer, but I went through with it and then put it right there for everyone to see.
Yeah.
And so that I just had to look at it all the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to handle that.
Yeah, it was probably not my best decision.
I think it didn't eventually you got rid of it. once it got closer, didn't you
I don't know.
flip it over or something?
I actually found it a few days ago when I was moving, because I did move to a house in Winchester. That's where we're recording the show at. And I did actually find the countdown timer. And I thought about setting it to Ian's current release date, but I'd have to change it every month. I'd have to lower it by 10 days and then 15 days. And I really don't want to see how much time he has left in prison and count it in days, because I know it's like 4.5 to 5 years, and that's
it's a lot. It would make it seem not like it would make it seem longer than it really is, because that's exactly how long it really is. But it puts it into a different perspective that isn't always doesn't feel positive, you know.
Counting your days in prison is a difficult thing, because the days, you have so many of them. Even with the 18-month sentence, I calculated I had about 300 days that I was going to have to serve. It turned out to be closer to 330, but whatever. So if you count every single day, you've got to go through 300 of those. And in your first week of prison, that's a whole lot of days. So you start doing weeks instead, and I calculated 40 weeks, which was way too low. It turned out to be closer to 46, I think. And they don't go by quickly enough. So you don't have a good way to go about doing it. Some of these guys, though, they had been in prison for 3 years already, and they had like 4 or 5 years left. I cannot imagine how difficult that is, because I was only in for 11 months. And the first 3 weeks are the worst. Then you sort of adapt to it, and it still sucks, and you want to be out there with your friends and your family and your pets. But you adapt to it. Mm-hmm. So I imagine that after that 3-week period, 5 years isn't very fundamentally different from 1 year as far as sentences go. But I'm glad to have only gotten 18 months, and I hope Ian will be released soon, because there was this new thing that I don't want to talk about because I'm getting it. Hopefully, I asked Tom Woods if he wanted to come on and talk about the Chevron deference thing next week. But he's actually really busy with Freedom Fest and stuff. I was shocked that Tom Woods got back to me within like minutes of me emailing him. So thank you, Tom, for that. Awesome. But he recommended me to some other expert who works at some university or something. So hopefully that will be next week or the week after, or maybe I'll get them on Free Talk Live.
Yeah, Matt has been all over that, and he was actually very surprised that more Liberty people aren't talking about that.
I'm thrilled about it. I thought it was already something that had been going on, though, because
it's been a long time coming, but I think it just officially got overturned.
Because in October of 2022, I think, my attorney and I filed a motion to dismiss the charges against myself and Ian, counts 1, 2, and 3, on the grounds that the Supreme Court seemed to be turning away from the Chevron deference. And we're instead using something called the Major Questions Doctrine, which is this idea that if Congress didn't explicitly authorize a federal agency to do something, then they're not allowed to do it. Whereas the Chevron deference is the opposite approach, where if Congress has not said they cannot do it, then they're allowed to. And this is critically important for the Bitcoin case, because Congress had not authorized FinCEN to regulate Bitcoin transactions until January of 2021. And all of the activity that we were accused of engaging in happened prior to January of 2021. Now, in January 2021, a new law did go into effect, or a change to an existing law went into effect technically, where they added basically a catch-all to the legislation that any other type of funds or something like that clearly included cryptocurrency. But they added that to include cryptocurrency, which also stands to reason that prior to January of 2021, it did not include crypto.
Yeah.
If they had to specifically add crypto to it, then before that, it did not include crypto. But FinCEN had been regulating cryptocurrency transactions in the first place and exchanges, as was the SEC and others, and that's a violation of the Supreme Court's new position on this. So we argued that the case should be dismissed because FinCEN wasn't authorized to require us to get licenses in the first place. The judge disagreed. He said that this would be a novel application of this new doctrine, and I don't want to set that precedent.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was, yeah.
So that got kicked back, but Ian is continuing to appeal it, and I suspect he will appeal it all the way to the Supreme Court.
I'm sure he will.
Where they will almost certainly agree that under their new doctrine, FinCEN had not regulated Bitcoin transactions until January 2021. And that is one of the 3 scenarios in which I can appeal my conviction. If something changes within the Supreme Court is one of those things. So Ian fighting this particular battle, which, by the way, is a result of the motion that my attorney originally filed, and he's now Ian's attorney as well. It's really cool. He's a really good attorney. Anyway, I've talked about that countless times. I didn't mean to get into all of that, but the Chevron thing is new, and it's definitely worth talking about. But I don't want to talk about it here. I want to talk about PorcFest, because we just got back from that. I immediately came back from PorcFest, and on Monday, I packed up the stuff I had unpacked in my apartment. I put it back into boxes because on Tuesday, the moving company was out there at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I had learned from this moving experience that I really hate moving. I've moved a lot, but like I've acquired a lot of stuff over the years, and I wasn't aware of how much stuff I really had. But I have acquired a rather lot of stuff, and I didn't want to deal with it. So I hired a moving company, and these professionals had everything loaded up into their truck within an hour and a half.
Wow.
And then we were on our way
And they're
here.
probably so organized too, because this is what they do all day, every day.
Yeah, they were shockingly good at it. Like things that I would struggle with,
And they're probably so strong too, because they're always lifting furniture and heavy boxes. And yeah, I remember the last time I moved into our new house, and we were not
congrats on that.
organized. Yeah, thank you. We were not organized. We had some muscle there, but no, the organization and the timeliness wasn't really.
Well,
Nope.
these guys were organized. The problem was that I was not overly organized, because when I packed all of this stuff, I was in the mindset of, one, I'm about to go to federal prison, and two,
Oh yeah.
I'm not actually leaving anyway, because I was planning to return to the old house that I was at.
Right.
So I just packed it up so that I could take it upstairs to my bedroom and just leave it there until I got back out, and then I could just take it back downstairs, right? So I didn't pack it with the intention of having to load it into a truck and move. And then I was in prison when some of my friends went out there to get all of my stuff and move it out, because I had already found a different place that I wanted to live at. So I didn't really have a whole lot to do with all of that, but I was in a very weird mindset anyway, and because of that, I did not find my Nintendo Switch until about a week ago. And I would never have packed it in the place where I packed it under any other circumstance, except that I was just completely scatterbrained.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame you, given the circumstances.
So that was last Tuesday, and I've since been moving stuff around, unpacking, getting the house set up, and for the most part, I'm done with that at this point, and I'm so happy with that. And this is my first real day off, and but that was right after PorcFest was what I was getting at. Was basically I came right after PorcFest and got right back into other chaos and insanity, but it's finally chilled now. PorcFest itself, it was a mixed bag for me this year, because it was difficult to be there. It's been difficult to be there every year since 2021. Because Ian was the person that I hung out with the most at PorcFest and at the Porcupine Freedom Festival. Especially in 2020, the year right before the raid, Ian and I hung out together constantly, all day, every day. And then we would just leave for 4 hours to go and do stuff, and we were really vague. We were going to deal with banks, realistically. And like the prosecutors know that at this point. But we were really vague to the other libertarians about what we were doing. So it must have seemed really weird. We're like, hey guys, so we're leaving. We'll be back this afternoon. They're like, oh, where are you guys going? Oh, just places, But it was a lot of fun, and we did spend a lot of time together. I spent a lot of time with Jazzy that year as well. Really good dog. She's dead now, obviously. But it's difficult to be there without the sort of extrovert that had adopted me and dragged me out to all of the parties and all the events, because I'm sort of an introvert. So how was your PorcFest this year versus previous years?
Yeah, I mean, PorcFest was definitely very different for me this year because we had the baby.
Oh, yes.
So there was that. I had my +1 with me. And like I said earlier in this episode, we kind of have to be together all the time, but I do teach classes at PorcFest. So I run a hub called Spiritual Village at PorcFest.
Now, this used to be Danny, I don't know.
So yeah, Danny Panzella is also involved with Spiritual Village as well. So we are kind of joint collaborators, organizers, and Devin Rogers of New Vinland, which is an also true pagan group. But yeah, so there's a few different people that all come together and we organize it, very, decentralized and, classic libertarian fashion.
As it should be.
Yeah, exactly, as it should be. But this year, I actually took a big step up in my organizer leadership role of Spiritual Village, since we had a couple people back out last second. So yeah, I ended up at the last second really kind of taking things over. But it ended up being really, really good, and I'm even starting to get really excited for next year because we have all sorts of plans on how to make it bigger and better, just getting more people involved and, just making it as cool and fun as it can be. So at Spiritual Village, I taught yoga every day, which I had been for the past 4 or 5 years at PorcFest.
Yeah, ever since I think you've been coming, I've been knowing you to do yoga classes there, which
Yep.
is awesome. I love yoga, and I did a lot of yoga in prison. Not so much since I got out of prison because I made the mistake of starting back smoking, but I'm working on that. I'm on Chantix again. But I can't do yoga early in the morning anyway, and I realize that's the best time to do it.
Well, I mean, I think it's different for everybody. But I guess it depends what you want to get out of it, maybe.
I'm definitely not a morning person, and it usually takes me an hour or two to really feel like I want to move around and do anything.
Yeah.
But so I've never been to any of those yoga classes, basically is what I was getting at. So you have the yoga classes. What else do you have at the Spiritual Village?
Yep. So I did yoga classes every day, and then I also did a sovereign birth talk, just kind of explaining different options when it comes to prenatal care, birth, and then also talking a little bit about social security numbers, birth certificates, passports, different ways you can register your children or not register your children. And then also talking about, obviously, you need a social security number in the United States to do many things. So kind of just discussing, what that looks like for people who might choose to not do those things. You might not be able to get health insurance for your child or just stuff like that. So that was a really fun talk to have. And then I also did a hormone balancing and fertility class, which was really cool as well. And this was a great way for me to do some community outreach because I offer some of these services professionally. So I do a lot of hormone balancing work. And then I also just launched a birth prep course, the Knowledge is Power birth prep course, and all that stuff's available on my website, bornfreefamily.com. So, but yeah, it was a good way for me to connect with people. I met a lot of new people this year, and I was actually able to connect with some people that I'm now working with. So,
Fantastic.
and I've done that at PorcFest in the past, and it's just a really great place to do it because we're running into like-minded people. And it is kind of hard to find people that do the work that I do. There's tons of doulas and midwives out there, but I really approach it at a completely different angle. I'm really supporting women out of the system as much as they want to be out of the system. But it's not always easy to find people that do this style of birth work and holistic healing and stuff like that. So
I can imagine. I suspect there's not nearly as much demand for your services as there should be, because I didn't know until you began talking to me about it how horribly the medical industry treats women.
absolutely, yeah.
And pregnant women get it worse. I think, was it you who said it's silly to go to the hospital because a pregnancy isn't an illness?
Yeah, so pregnancy is really treated like a disease, especially in the United States and a lot of other developed countries. But I mean, women have been doing this for thousands of years, since the beginning of human existence, and even beyond that when you're thinking about animals, right? So this is just a thing that we do. It doesn't have to be this medical emergency and this dramatic event. It is sometimes, especially when you have women that might not be super healthy, or, of course, there are other factors and even environmental factors that we can't necessarily control. So I never try to convince people that home birth is the absolute best thing for them. I really think it should be an individualized decision.
Certainly.
And women definitely deserve to be educated about their options, which is a huge thing that I'm trying to support my community with these days, especially where I'm not attending as many births as I was before. Now that I have my own baby, But that was a big reason why I wanted to launch an online course, because it would just have all of my knowledge and information that I've been collecting over the years studying this stuff and, training under midwives and researching birth and attending births. I just wanted, a easy, simple platform where all of my information is just right there available for people.
And that's bornfreefamily.com?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Fantastic.
The Knowledge is Power birth prep course.
I love it. And you had mentioned getting Social Security numbers or not getting Social Security numbers. Of course, co-host of the show and friend, Jay Noon, does not have a Social Security number because his dad was hardcore.
Yeah.
And he has run into a lot of challenges throughout his life as a result of this. You can't open a bank account if you don't have a Social Security number. You can't get a loan from a bank. And there's all sorts of challenges that people wouldn't normally expect. But just about everything I've ever done, including getting the electricity switched on at this place, required my Social Security number.
Yeah, there is a couple of ways around it. So for certain things, you can't get around it. But sometimes if they're asking for it, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to give it. Only in certain situations, of course. But what I really like to tell people who are going back and forth on it, whether they're going to do this for their children, is just thinking, do you absolutely need it right now? Maybe your kid might want it in the future to get a driver's license or a bank account or, whatever. But that is a forever decision. So you can never take that back. You can always register your child later. You can always get a Social Security number later. You can get a birth certificate later. You can do all of these things later. But once you do it, it's permanent. It's forever. You can never take it back. Of course, some libertarians have some ways where they mail their Social Security card back and fill out all of this paperwork. I'm not completely sold on that. I mean, I know everybody, people have their different opinions on that, whether that works or is legit or not. I mean, we're seeing what's going on with Roger Ver right now. So obviously that's a different thing, but still similar where you try to negotiate with these people to get your rights and your freedoms back and say, I'm not a U.S. citizen anymore. And that doesn't always work. So, I just tell people, you don't necessarily have to do it when your kid is newborn. You can always wait a little bit. And then if you decide when they're 5 years old, or if your child decides when they're 16 or when they're 18 or 21, hey, I actually do want to participate in the system and I'm going to need a Social Security number to do that, they can always opt in later.
I was not aware of that. I guess I don't understand how the process works, especially for a birth certificate, because I would have assumed that the hospital, because of course it's always a hospital, issues the birth certificate or the certificate of live birth or whatever, and that had to be done pretty much right then.
Yeah, so it depends. With home birth, it's a little bit different, but also some midwives, depending on what state you're in, so some midwives and doctors are required by state law and by their governing licensing bodies that if they attend a birth, it's mandatory that they fill out a birth certificate.
Wow.
Or something to have a legal document that records the birth.
That's so egregious because, as you point out, women have been giving birth for hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years if you go all the way back, and never in this process has a birth certificate been necessary for the birth to happen.
Well, it's all government.
That's exactly it. They just
you know what I mean? Yeah, that was before the government got way too involved with everyone's lives.
You should absolutely be allowed to have a child without the government being notified.
And you know what else I found out? So you know how previously people would record births and deaths in the family Bible. You can actually still do that, and it can count as a legal documentation of the birth in certain states.
Wow.
I think you need a pastor to sign off on it, and there might be some other paperwork involved. This is something I recently found out about, so I'm not super, well read in it. But I thought that was very interesting. There are many different avenues you can go to if you want to avoid a birth certificate for whatever reason.
And libertarians do have all sorts of little kooky methods that they advise on how to get out of this or how to get out of that. And I'm also not sold. I'm a skeptic on all of these claims. We had someone on the show during the Porcupine Freedom Festival who basically said that if you file this one particular document in this one particular way, then you no longer have any federal income tax liability whatsoever. Which,
Yeah, tell the IRS that.
right. I tend to think if that was true, everyone would know it, first of all.
Yeah.
And it's only true, it's only going to work for people who don't land on the IRS's radar.
Yeah. Well, so in that vein, I mean, no one really has to file their taxes, right?
Right.
And maybe you'll get audited. Maybe the IRS will go after you, and maybe they won't. It's, in my opinion, just based on what I've seen, it's kind of luck of the draw. I've seen some people do these things, and it worked out for them for now, and they're not having any repercussions. I've seen some people try it, and it backfires on them. So...
Speaking of backfiring, among the conversations we had was his assertion that if Ian had done these things, then he could not have been charged with tax evasion as he was, and ultimately convicted of, I think, 4 counts of tax evasion. And I don't think any of that would have held up in federal court. I don't think being able to hold up a sheet of paper saying, look, when I did my passport, I stated I wasn't an American citizen, and therefore I don't think that would have worked. He insisted it would have, more or less, and his process was more complicated than just signing a sheet of paper or whatever, but it seems to me like some of that sovereign citizen stuff where like, oh, you just have to stand up to the court and tell them that they summoned someone whose name is spelled in all caps and you're not that person, so, and therefore charges dismissed. Like, look, that will probably get you out of a traffic ticket because the judge is, I don't want to deal with this, get out of here.
Yes.
But the federal judge is not going to do that.
Yeah, so they can kind of do whatever they want, and we've seen that where there are, in Ian's case, for example, obviously you guys weren't actually breaking the law. From my perspective, I don't think you guys are breaking the law at all.
Well, the prosecutors and the judge seem to agree with that because the law that we had allegedly broken, the one that required us to have a big money transmission license, they were not allowed to actually cite that law to the jury in the jury instructions. They weren't allowed to tell the jury what law we allegedly broke. They were allowed to tell them what actions we committed, and they were allowed to make the argument that, look, if they committed these 4 actions, then they broke the law. But they weren't able to say what law had actually been broken. They're like, look, they wore a red sweatshirt, Arya's got red hair, she wears black skirts, therefore, you got to find her guilty. But yes, all of those things are true, but there's nothing illegal about any of that. And because of the motion to dismiss that we had filed, they weren't allowed to actually cite what law those actions had allegedly broken because it would appear that we did not violate that law. So, yeah, they do whatever they want.
Well, that's the thing. It's all so convoluted and confusing, and there's so much performative crap that goes along with it.
Yeah. So freefamilybirth, is that right?
Bornfreefamily.com. Mm-hmm. And my business is Born Free Yoga and Wellness.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sitting down and joining with us.
Thank you.
I look forward to doing this with you next time you're available.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're out of time for today. Sign up, join us, I'll share it around, all of that great stuff. We do have a new video channel that you can find at lrn.fm. It's just look for lrn.fm on YouTube. Free Talk Live has its own dedicated YouTube channel, and it always has. But I want this one to have more than just Free Talk Live. So currently we've started an On Libertarians, or Libertarians On series, which is where I just get a libertarian to give me a 1-minute take on an issue that's important to them. And this is a hard 1 minute, right? Like nothing over 1 minute is going to be allowed.
That's going to be tough for libertarians.
Right, but that's why it's so critically important. And to have like 200 or 300 of these in a playlist that people can just watch and share with their family and friends, I think is a great idea. You can find that on the LRN channel. You can find out all about the stuff that we're doing at freetalkblog.com as well, which was launched at PorkFest. So check that out. It's got links to all the other stuff. That's freetalkblog.com. And of course, listen to the radio show at freetalklive.com.